As Earth was continually ransacked by the insatiable horde of demons and Doom Eternal, in an effort to stem the flow, the Doomslayer would have to go back to where it all began. Back when he was transported across the cosmos and dropped onto a planet of aliens who, although kind of humanoid in structuring, were much more on par with the natural strength of the Doom Guy, at least in some capacity. In the early years of living with these Night Sentinels, Doom Guy was confined to an arena where criminals were sent in order to retain some of their honor, and then ultimately, if they won, their prize was to be sent out into the battlefield to meet their end. The arena used to be a starkly honorable area used to separate the worthy from the unworthy in Night Sentinel mythology. However, as expected, the hell energy that slowly corrupt the makers would ultimately do the same to the Night Sentinels and begin to change the usage of the arena. Leaving behind its glorious past, eventually combatants were replaced by demons and ill-equipped Night Sentinels. As this insidious energy began creeping across the species as it had done for every other planet, their goals became more focused on the shedding of blood. The Hell Priests would go on to turn the arena into a blood sport area and release a massive demon known as the Gladiator to tear anyone down the Hell Priests threw in. Despite a civil war taking place and half of the Night Sentinels being trapped in hell to fight to the last man, the sport would still continue. Which brings us to where we are now. With the effort of the Doomslayer to stop the demons, he would have to go onto the Night Sentinel planet to track the Hell Priests down. And here is where he would find the Gladiator waiting for him. This beastly creature towers over most other demons in stature, but has a few clues on its body showing kind of where it may have come from and what it might have been related to more specifically. So today we'll be covering the Gladiator as expected and attempt to draw out some more of its lore and origins. Descending onto the arena floor, this creature barely fits through the door. We can only assume that based on its size, this creature would stand somewhere in the range of 16 to 20 feet tall or roughly 5 to 6 meters tall. Now everyone made fun of me when I got the weight wrong on the Baron of Hell, so let's just say that considering it's taller than the Baron and also wider, it would easily be about 20 to 40% heavier than its smaller related Hell Noble, so make of that what you will. Basically, it's just really freaking heavy. As the demon has fought over the centuries for the debauched civilization of Night Sentinels, interestingly, it appears as though it has never lost, but instead, it has been injured. Sporting an eye patch over the right ocular cavity, it can only be assumed that someone who's no longer in the land of the living got in a lucky stab and was able to puncture the eye before they were more than likely turned into a blood paste. Apart from that, this creature does not appear to have suffered any other injuries, although we will discuss this a little later on. Covered with a primitive looking armor with the occasional piece of bone, this demon has little to fear from the combatants that are thrown in around it. Wielding a ridiculously powerful mace, shaped in the formation of a skull, it can easily cave in the opponent's skulls, and also has the ability to outstretch this mace to sort of reach those who try to keep their distance. But arguably the greatest counter this creature has is its shield that it raises in its defense. Impenetrable to all handhelds the Doomslayer possesses, the only flaw it has is before it is lowered, the eyes will blink green, indicating an attack is about to happen. However, the abilities it has more than make up for any shortcomings. Again, it can block all forms of lead fired, block concussive force of an explosion, and in general just resist anything you throw at it. The shield itself is actually rumored to be the soul of the demon that wields it, forever tormented and ripped from its meat suit to take rockets to the face. Due to this soul-body separation, it would also appear that the demon can really never be stopped by like mere mortals. When the creature is brought down, it will ultimately end up being anchored to this realm by its shield. Its body will heal and then recover as it slowly builds back up and then is ready for the next fight. Due to this ability, it's a regular within the arena and likely has taken out many mortals through its existence. However, as we all know, the Doomslayer is no average man or sentinel, so clearly we know he can take it out. But before getting there and also discussing the relation the Gladiator has to other Hell Nobles, we must first discuss its morphology to get sort of an idea about what makes it different from others. As per usual, starting with the hooves, we can see that this is really just sort of those classic view of demons. Basically, it's just a giant goat man. The hooves on this demon are massive, arguably larger than that on a Baron of Hell, and as a result, this creature could easily stomp out others in the arena pretty simply. Moving up to the legs, we see that interestingly, unlike the other demons, there are still plenty of hair on it. With the Hell Knights and Baron of Hell demons, all hair has been completely lost on their bodies. We see that when humans are also subjected to enough hell energy, their bodies begin to degrade and the hair follicles are lost. This would indicate that this demon in particular has perhaps maybe a less hell energy exposure than say with the other nobles. It would also say that something about the planet and universe they originally inhabited, but we will get to that momentarily. The legs are digitigrade in structuring, meaning that they walk on the balls of their hooves, with the ankle further up and the knees being just over or a little past the hooves when they stand. This structuring is actually better for running, if you really didn't know, and it takes weight off the knees and places them more on ligaments. Moving further up, we can see that the hair actually stops around the pelvic area. However, on the right side of the thigh exists some pretty heavy-duty armor to protect from femur breaks, but on the other side, it has foregone this due to that side being protected by the shield. So who knew demons had modesty, or really that they might understand protecting sensitive areas? Around the pelvic region sits a loincloth-like armor, and it will protect everything underneath. This is actually pretty interesting because this calls back to the idea of less hell energy exposure, which means you get to keep certain parts of your body that you might not normally have if, say, you were like a revenant, for instance. Revenants are all smooth down there like Ken dolls, because it's really just all gone. Nobody wants to check, but yeah, I think we get it. So moving on, heading up the abdomen, we see that the gladiator life has been good and my boy is jacked. Moving further up to the chest, we see that the same muscle mass is being sported, but on the right shoulder, covering the right side, more plated armor can be seen to protect that side from exposure, considering there was no shield being used to cover this area. Moving up to the shoulders, we can see that much like on the knights and barons, there is a natural amount of armor to protect this creature. The right shoulder has added armor, as said, to beef up protection, whereas the left shoulder needed to be freed up to use the shield. The deltoids on the left side and the trapezius muscle on the neck on the left side have predictably become larger over time as more muscle mass was needed to just keep that big of a shield raised. Moving down the arms, we find that this creature is still continuing to be swogoles. The right forearm is protected by a gauntlet, whereas the left is really not and appears to have leather padding for the impacts from the shield. In the right hand, the gladiator holds a mace capable of blood pasting anyone with a direct hit, and the left hand is used for the shield and an offhand mace when the shield is lost. The hands themselves are pretty massive, larger than a baron's, and each finger is tipped with large claws that could be used in battle should it even get close and really need this to happen. Though likely this creature has never needed to use claws. But I do want to point something out, however. This creature possesses 5 fingers, which is going to be important later. Moving up to the head, we see a gaunt face with a single yellow eye. Flanking each side of a diabolical mouth lined with razor-sharp teeth are 2 flanged jaws. These likely grew after exposure to the hell energy. The cheekbones are also jagged and sharp as well. A single yellow eye on the left is visible, suggesting different energy from normal, and on top of its head sits 2 large horns. On the back is still a mangy patch of hair that runs up to the head, indicating that likely this creature had a lot of hair, but recently it was lost, as in specifically with the gladiator, because its species likely had hair. As I begin to learn about this creature, one of the more interesting aspects I can find is the asymmetry due to the shield being utilized. But as I began to look into this beast a little more, an interesting question began to pop up. What exactly is this thing? Well, the lore refers to it being either a Hell Knight or a Baron of Hell, at least an altered one, but honestly I would have to disagree. So the last time I disagreed with something was the last episode when I mentioned in Rec it wasn't a demonic enzyme, it just behaved like rabies, and man, did I get some salty comments in that video. We're gonna probably have to do an entire breakdown of the entire series at some point, but this creature appears to be different from both of these classes for several reasons. First, let's talk about hell energy exposure. When an animal is exposed to more and more doses, the meat suit suffers considerably. Starting with humans, we can see it pretty starkly. Those who were exposed to just a small amount become mindless wandering zombies who may at some point have a singular ocular cavity or both eyes. If they were alive at the time of their exposure, they will still possess some kind of chaotic movement. And I mention it being chaotic because I talked about this in the Carcass episode. It has completely different movement, but that's also because it has machines attached to it. But we'll get to that in a moment. So there are scientists or civilians that you see wandering around when they were infected, or at least exposed to this hell energy. Structurally, their bones have changed, but it also appears as though most of their hair on their body was lost as well. Soldiers would have been exposed to even more energy, as they would have been the ones to be sent in to stop demons, meaning that they were closer to the sources. They do sport some hair, but they also appear to have been recently turned too, as they do continue to fight demons and the Doomslayer all at once, just not very successfully. Finally, with humans, the most exposure seems to be the revenants, who literally have their body melting, and they appear to be mostly bone with some skin and covering, but really it's just mostly muscle tissue. But even with this massive exposure, they all still possess roughly the same amount of bones, despite some modifications to the structuring. No real loss or addition is seen. Moving to the Hell Knights, we see that in Doom Eternal, these particular creatures still have their eyes. They didn't have it in Doom 2016, or they were covered up with like a patch of skin. There is a Dread Knight who appears to have a higher exposure level, and as a result, they are more heavily armored and possess blades to be used in combat. But one of the more interesting things that you may notice about the Hell Knights is they possess a similar leg structuring as the Barons and to the Gladiator, but they possess padded feet with claws as opposed to legitimate hooves. They are much smaller than the Gladiator or Baron, standing roughly 9 feet tall or about 3 meters. So this would indicate to me that in reality the Hell Knights may have some relation to the Gladiator, but are actually not related in any meaningful capacity. Moving to the Barons, we see that this is something a little more on par with what the Gladiators may be. They stand roughly about 4.5 25 meters tall or 14 feet and do possess the same hooves and leg structuring. They also appear in older games to have the hair on their legs like the Goatmen, but in Doom Eternal and Doom 2016, they have lost this hair. Now again, this could be due to hell energy exposure, as it seems to take hair away from mammals fairly easily. That said, the Gladiator is larger than them and also does possess the horns we see on the Barons that is absent from the Hell Knights. We also see with the Fireborn Baron that the hell energy almost seems to be bursting through them and has changed the skin color to a similar color as the Gladiator. But the main issue with the Gladiator being related to either of these creatures is, funnily enough, the amount of fingers they possess. On both the Hell Knight and the Baron of Hell, they possess 3 digits and a thumb totaling out 4 fingers. None of the creatures have had any variance of this. Alright, so I can already hear you click-clacking away over there, but if we extrapolate from what we know on humans changing due to hell energy, and even with the Night Sentinels who were inundated with hell energy, what we can really figure out is that the bones do not appear and then just disappear. Even with the Cacao Demons, their limbs are just shriveled, but the bones are still there, albeit probably extremely brittle. So because of this, the creatures that existed before, such as the Hell Knight with 3 fingers and 1 thumb, along with a distinct lack of hooves, means that this creature couldn't be the Gladiator, and the Baron of Hell looks like a pretty appealing option due to its size and horns. But don't forget, the Night Sentinels didn't really have horns either until they were grown due to the energy. So horns are not really a unifying characteristic of these creatures. What it would appear to me is that the Gladiator is simply its own species, the largest on the planet that was conquered. We have seen in our own evolutionary tree that this is pretty common. Take horses, for instance. Once upon a time, they didn't have hooves. They actually just had padded feet and they had claws. If you take an early evolutionary ancestor like this and apply it to demons, the Hell Knight may have really just been one of those early ancestors that was still around and then turned. The Baron of Hell was likely an intermediate ancestor relating to the Gladiator who's similar but still not quite there, until finally you get to Big Papa, the latest in the evolutionary line, who's similar in some respects to the Baron but does have some of the leftover structurings of a knight. So for all this to work, likely this species was intelligent but not spacefaring by any capacity. Probability says that they were found by the Night Sentinels according to the Night Sentinel lore on their planet, and then they existed in the same society for quite some time, or different areas allowed for previous iterations of the species to exist simultaneously as the further down the evolutionary line of others. So like Homo sapiens existing around the same time as Neanderthals, for instance. But likely this species was turned, the lower orders of the evolutionary tree were exposed to more hell energy, turning them more demon than their previous versions, but the top of the evolutionary tree was brought into the arena for more sporting purposes and still retained some of its original morphology. So how do you end this evolutionary masterpiece? When dealing with the Gladiator, you really have to destroy its soul, otherwise it will keep getting back up.